Well, these Nashville Predators have certainly looked like an elite team during their 13-game point streak, so that has fans asking, could this Predators team actually contend in the postseason? We'll answer that today on the Locked On Predators podcast.
Your Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making the Locked On Predators podcast your first listen of the day every single day. We are your free daily Nashville Predators podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, want to start out with a special shout out for our loyal Locked On Pred heads out there, the everydayers who tune into every single show. We love you guys and we appreciate the support you give us week in and week out. I'm Nick Morgan. I'm a writer at Penalty Box Radio. Normally I have a partner in crime, but Ann Kimmel's off this week. To our loyal Locked On Pred heads, just wanted to quickly thank you guys for bearing with us over the past month or so. We know that things have been maybe a little bit different in terms of scheduling. We're doing an episode on Saturday today. We've missed some days. We've had a couple shows maybe go out later in the day than you're probably usually used to. Ann and I just have a lot going on right now behind the scenes, whether it's work stuff, home stuff, family visits, travel. It's been a busy couple of months for both of us. So thank you guys for bearing with us and understanding that real life can sometimes maybe throw off your hockey podcasting schedule a little bit. A lot to talk about on today's show. The Nashville Predators played the Seattle Kraken tonight, looking for their 14th consecutive game with at least a point. But given that the Seattle Kraken firmly in the playoff hunt, I would have to imagine Preds fans probably want to see 2 points and a W as opposed to maybe just another loser point. There's also going to be some, I guess, drama on defense. Spencer Stastney is now out with an injury. We know Dante Fabro is already out with an injury. So that maybe means we see Tyson Barrie return to the team tonight. We'll talk about the future of the defense and whether the Preds need to do anything to maybe fill the gaps. First, though, let's talk about where the Predators are as a whole in the big picture, because we talked about it yesterday. This team is easily the most fun I can ever remember watching the Nashville Predators. Like the way they've played in the past 3 weeks, they look as sharp as they did. I'm going back to like the end of 2012, when like the Radulov came back and the Kostitsyn brothers reunited. I'm going back to the Paul Kariya years where it just seems like they're swarming. This is the best the Predators have looked in a very long time, if you just kind of count the past like month or so. The offense is fun. Juuse Saros and Kevin Lankinen are lights out in goal. The defense is doing just enough to do what they can to like stymie the opposition, force turnovers, get possession back to the Preds. And on top of that, the Preds in these games are dominating. They're out shooting teams, they're out possessing teams. Like you can clearly see they're getting the bulk of the chances in these games, for the most part. This team looks like exactly kind of what you envisioned them being when you were manifesting, this new Andrew Burnett era. That's led to the question, like, how far can these Preds go if they're playing like this? If they're looking like a Colorado, could they actually be a Colorado? Could they actually go and make a run in the postseason? Are they going to channel that energy of the 2019 Blues or even the 2017 Nashville Predators? Because that's a comparison people are making. So let's look at this just, sort of objectively. they put out, I think like The Athletic puts out what they call like a Stanley Cup checklist, and it's, an elite scoring line, and then like a second line who would be a first line on most any other team. Basically, it's almost like, your quality of your depth chart is like one tier above what the average NHL team is. So for instance, like, if you had an elite first line, your second line would probably be a first line on any other NHL team. Your third line would probably be a second line on any NHL team. It goes down like, like on defense, like your number one pair is elite. Your number two pair would maybe be a number one pair on like an average team. So let's look at see the Nashville Predators kind of have those tools right now. Philip Forsberg, I think, is in, maybe not an elite tier, but certainly among the NHL's best right now. Top 10 in the NHL in goals. As we mentioned, there's only been one other season in which a Predator has had a top 10 finish in the NHL in scoring. Philip Forsberg was that guy, and Matt Duchene. Is Ryan O'Reilly going to be kind of, let's also point out that Gustav Nyquist on that wing has also been scoring lights out too. One of his best scoring seasons of his entire career. You look at, Ryan O'Reilly, also very good. I not necessarily think that he's kind of who you want as your number one center if you're pointing out like elite teams, but he's certainly doing the job for Nashville right now. And I think, he's going to be, just because of his two-way presence, a really tough matchup for other teams' top line. Then you look at, what the depth is behind there. And that's something that I think is maybe still the biggest question mark for this Nashville Predators team, is that depth behind those guys that are scoring right now. Because look, Tommy Novak, Luke Evangelista playing very, very well right now. Are they playing well enough to maybe, outshine like a JT Miller or a Brock Besser, like, sort of that second tier of top players on another team? Rupe Hintz, a good example out in Dallas. That to me is the biggest question mark. You brought in Zucker, you brought in Beauvillier for that extra depth. Are they going to be, they've certainly, I think, improved the Nashville Predators. Let me phrase it that way. The moves that the Nashville Predators have made and I think growth of certain players on the team certainly improve the Nashville Predators and certainly make them a more dangerous team. I don't know if they're going to be like a Stanley Cup quality team, but you can certainly say that the moves that the Predators have made and the improvements of a lot of the depth players are why the Nashville Predators are playing as good as they are. You look on defense, Roman Josi right now, over the past month, has been the best defenseman in the NHL, both in his own end and on offense. In fact, Alex Doherty made a pitch in the Tennessean, kind of pitching. Look, Roman Josi needs to be at least in the Norris conversation. Quinn Hughes is probably the front runner right now. Cale Makar is right behind him, but it's time to start talking about Roman Josi maybe getting some recognition as maybe a finalist. And it's hard to argue because you look at Josi's numbers during this Predators run, and they're insane. And he is, carrying the burden as it comes to scoring. He is carrying the team defensively as it comes to being a shutdown defender. This is the best we've seen Josi defensively in his own end probably since his Norris Trophy winning season in 2020. And look, on defense, the guys behind him are doing just as well. Ryan McDonough, for all the talk about him maybe being a step slower, him being a little bit washed, he is absolutely proving that he can still play. And this has been one of his best seasons in recent memory. Jeremy Lauzon and Alexander Carrier anchoring sort of that, that bottom pair. Lauzon, this is the best season he's ever had. He's chasing the hit record. So he's going to maybe make some Preds history this year, make some NHL history. The Preds can finally say they have a historic defensemen on their team. But even beyond that, Jeremy Lauzon has been a very good penalty killer. The Preds penalty kill has improved a lot as the season's gone on. He's been a very good shutdown defender. Andrew Burnett is not afraid to put him out there against some of the tougher opponents that the Predators face. He's gone against McKinnon, he's gone against McDavid, and has looked really well against them. Alexander Carrier, no idea what his future is going to be in Nashville, but the Preds are glad to have him. Maybe the only question mark is now, because of the injuries that we're going to talk about here in a second, what that other sort of pairing is going to look like, because you don't have Dante Fabro right now, who for being as up and down as he has been in his Preds tenure, has played very well this year. You don't have Spencer Stastney, who the Predators are really, really high on. You're going to kind of have to rely on Luke Schenn, who is objectively has played all right lately. And Tyson Barrie, who, we've talked about a lot here on this show here in the past little bit. That to me is maybe the only concern with the Nashville Predators, is that bottom line, because when you get to the playoffs, that bottom line has got to be as good as other teams' top fours. We saw it when the Nashville Predators made their run to the finals in 2017. Matt Irwin and Yannick Weber were out there in key moments. They're out there late in the game. They're out there in shutdown roles. It doesn't matter if the Preds were down 4-1, up 4-1, or down 2-1, 3-2, up 3-1, 3-2. No matter the situation, they played big minutes. And that is something that you want to have from your bottom pair. And maybe that's the one holdup on defense with this Nashville Predators team. UC Saros and Kevin Lankin, we've talked about them enough. That's their quality of goaltending is really good right now. You have a goaltender like UC Saros, who historically plays better as the season goes on. You get him into the postseason. We saw what he did against Carolina a few years ago. Preds were totally outmatched. He nearly stole that series. That is exactly the type of goaltender you want for this team. So yeah, the Nashville Predators have some pieces to contend. Do they have enough to actually win a playoff series? Let's talk about that part of the conversation in just a second. And also the comparisons some people are making to the 2017 Preds, because there are some similarities, but also some big differences. We'll talk about that in just 1 second. First, though, I want to mention today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have a separate IRA? And Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood's even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is only good through April 30th, so get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. All right, Nashville Predators, of course, taking on the Seattle Kraken tonight. That is a big game for the Nashville Predators. The Kraken are just desperately clinging to playoff hopes right now. We're going to have recap of that game on Monday. We'll also have a little bit of a preview of that coming up later on this show. We'll also have some plus minus for you on Monday. First, though, let's go back to the conversation we're having a little bit earlier. And it's, can these Nashville Predators contend in the playoffs. Maybe not for a Stanley Cup, but maybe they can make a little bit of a playoff run. We talked about the roster and the shape up. There are some traits of good Stanley Cup teams. There are also some holes that are still a concern. Let's talk about, sort of the aspect that a lot of people are bringing up online. It's always the argument when a sort of mid-Nashville Predators team winds up doing a lot better than a lot of people thought they were. And that's the 2017 Preds. It seems like there's been, I think back to 2022. I think back to when they tried to make the playoffs last year. Whenever like a team that everyone thinks is going to be bad winds up getting close, it's always a discussion about, are these like the 2017 Preds? Hey, we did this in 2017. We can do it again, right? So here's the thing about that. The thing about the 2017 Preds is that maybe the top end talent wasn't quite as top end as some other teams up front. You had PK Subban, you had Roman Josi, Ryan Ellis, Matthias Ekholm, you had Pekka Rinne. And that was sort of the group that carried this team. You didn't exactly beat teams by, just running the floor with them. Other than, maybe a couple of big games here and there. Now the Preds beat, Chicago 5-0 in that first round. And, here and there, they got some big scoring help. But you look sort of, that Anaheim series in St. Louis, there's a lot of sort of grinded out wins in which the Preds, did have some timely goals from depth players, but had to hang on late. This is the Nashville Predators team is a team being kind of carried by their elite players right now. They're beating teams by outscoring them. They're beating teams by outpacing them. You have a player like Philip Forsberg, Roman Josi, who are just putting up scoring at insane numbers right now. And that's kind of the impetus for why the Preds are doing so well. Yeah, they're getting some good contributions from depth. Guys all the way up and down the lineup. Jankowski, McCarron. You're getting good contributions from Jason Zucker, who scored his first goal the other day. Evangelista's getting hot. So you are getting some depth there, but it was almost more like a team in which the sum of its parts, were greater than the whole of some other teams. Like, you didn't exactly have like the top, like Hart caliber top scores, but you had like, we talk about like what the Seattle Kraken did last year, where you didn't necessarily have superstars. You just had 4 lines and 3 defensive pairs who happened to play really, really well together and were solid all the way around. This Nashville Predators team still seems a little, I would say, top heavy. Like, even though we're getting good contributions from some good players, it's certainly those top end guys who are kind of carrying the load and being the impetus for some of these wins. And that's not a bad thing. It's just, I think, a little bit different. And I think maybe a little bit harder to sort of win with if you're just top heavy, because you're going to count on that first line to do everything. Maybe that makes it a little bit more difficult in this case for the Nashville Predators. But on the other hand, now you have an elite top line. Now you have, especially when Roman Josi's out there with them, you have elite players that can kind of go out there and, maybe outplay another team's top line or convert on the power play. That's going to be important too, is for those elite players to step up and, like outplay other teams' elite players. You can sort of trust the Nashville Predators to maybe do that now. So it's a little, they're both paths to, maybe going deep, maybe pulling a playoff upset or two. They're just maybe a little bit different, a little bit of a different makeup. The makeup of this Nashville Predators team is not the same makeup as the team that we saw in 2017. It doesn't mean that they can't make a big run. It doesn't mean that they can't compete. It's just that they might do that in a little bit of a different way with a little bit of a different vibe. The other big thing, and this is something a lot of people kind of talk about in a negative way, it's just some luck. And it can be in terms of, who what, like, even as simple as like what the matchup is in the first round of the postseason. The Nashville Predators in their 2017 run took on Chicago, who, had their number, but they were kind of sliding a little bit at the end of the season, where the Nashville Predators, I mean, they were sliding too, but, they just took advantage of a Chicago team that had some problems. They took on St. Louis. They match up very well against St. Louis. They matched up against Anaheim in the third round. They always had Anaheim's number. So that is maybe a little bit of a thing to consider, is just how the luck of this playoff draw is going to go out. As it stands right now, the Nashville Predators would play the Winnipeg Jets in the first round of the playoffs this year. And we know that they did very well against Winnipeg in the last game. There's also a chance that they may play either Colorado or Dallas. Is there one of those three that you would rather play? Colorado, they're getting red hot right now. Things are starting to get together at the right time for them. Dallas, they've beaten the Nashville Predators big 9-2 to start this whole thing. But remember, the Nashville Predators also beat them pretty handily a couple of weeks before that. It's just one of those things where maybe luck comes into play as to who you play. Remember, the Nashville Predators in 2022 blew a game against the Arizona Coyotes and wound up dropping, a peg in the standings, and wound up having to play the Avalanche in the first round, as opposed to the Calgary Flames, who were kind of sliding at that time and who the Predators had a better matchup against. So it's one of those things where matchups, luck, how other teams do, the quality of team in which you're facing, that thing comes into play too. And I think Nashville Predators, I'm not going to say they had an easy route in 2017, but I think they certainly had a route that was favorable to them. And that is something, maybe that becomes a difference in what happens in the playoffs this year for the Nashville Predators as well. Let's look ahead to tonight's game. They take on the Seattle Kraken. They're going to have to do so without Spencer Stastney, who's out with injury. Looks like Tyson Barrie's coming back in the lineup. What to expect when that happens, coming up in just 1 second. First, I want to mention today's episode is brought to you by Ibotta. Guys, if you've gone to the grocery store recently, even if it's just to grab a handful of ingredients or maybe some paper towels or something that you're out of, it just seems like every time you go, your wallet suffers, your bank account suffers. It doesn't have to, though. You can start getting cash back on your grocery shopping with the free Ibotta app, and you can get cash back every time you shop. Some of you may be asking what Ibotta is. Well, it's a free app that gives you the most cash back every time you shop on hundreds of items, from groceries to beauty supplies to even toys for your kids or, pet toys to your dog. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Hey, listen to this. The average Ibotta user, they save $256 per year. Guys, that's like the cost of an entire small family shopping trip. You can use that. Buy a flight to a vacation that you've been wanting to go on. Splurge on some tickets to the concert or the hockey game you want to go to. Or, hey, just take your family out for a nice dinner or a nice night on the town. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying it by using the code LOCKEDONNHL when you sign up. Again, just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back using code LOCKEDONNHL. Again, that's Ibotta on the Google Play or App Store using code LOCKEDONNHL. Nashville Predators taking on the Seattle Kraken tonight on the road in the Pacific Northwest. It's the Nashville Predators' last road game of this stretch before they come back to the comfy confines of Smashville later this week. against the San Jose Sharks. Somehow that'll be the game that ends the losing streak or ends the point streak. And of course it will. Let's talk about this Kraken matchup, because I don't think it's any secret the Seattle Kraken are the team that always seem to give the Nashville Predators fits, no matter how they're doing. They could have been the terrible expansion team. They could have been last year's playoff team. They could be this year's team that's somehow in the middle. It just always seems like the Kraken give the Predators fits. And that's nothing new this year. The Predators, of course, had that shutout against them in their first home game of the season. The Kraken came back, got a big win against them, and back in Nashville. So for this one, yeah, I anything can happen when the Seattle Kraken and the Nashville Predators get together. As for the Seattle Kraken, it's a little bit of an interesting situation for them this year, because they have some things better than they did last year, but they're not necessarily in the same place they were. You think about how the Kraken got to where they were last year, how they upset Colorado in the first round, how they made that surprise run to the postseason. And they had depth as good as any other team in the NHL. I think they had 13, maybe 14 players with at least 30 points, which was, I think, the most in the NHL last year, certainly the most in the Western Conference. So they had like more scoring depth than a team like the Colorado Avalanche did. They just didn't really necessarily have that go-to number one line that some other teams had. But in terms of, it's kind of like we talked about the Preds in 2017. The sum of all of their parts were greater than just some individual hot pieces on other teams. And that hasn't necessarily been the case for them this year. The same depth that they got last year just isn't there for them. And on top of that, their number one line from last year is just a little bit off. Matty Beniers, 57 points as a rookie last year, 9 points in 10 games during his debut year at the end of 2022. And it's, the Calder Trophy winner, rookie of the year, just going through a bad slump this year, just 27 points this season in 60 games, just 9 goals. Remember, he was a 24 goal scorer last year. Andre Burakovsky, who was a big part of that team's depth last year, a big part of the Avalanche depth the year before that. He's battled some injury issues, but even when he's been on the ice, just 11 points in 32 games. And you look around and, even some of their top scorers like Jordan Eberle, a little off from where he was last year. Oliver Bjorkstrand, maybe a little bit of a step back from where he was last year. So that depth just hasn't been there this year. The one thing that has been there for the Kraken, and that's something that I think the Preds are going to have to really be mindful of tonight, is goaltending. Joey Daccord has come out of virtually nowhere, it seems like, to become the Kraken's number one goaltender, and he has made the most of this opportunity. He is .919 save percentage this year. 2 shutouts. He's really, I think, we saw him in the Winter Classic, him kind of stepping up and, grabbing that game and really sort of owning it. He's been stealing some wins for the Kraken here lately. Games in which the Kraken are outshot, outplayed a little bit. Daccord's been the guy to step in and be able to sort of turn what look like they could be bad losses into wins, or at least points for Seattle. So that's something Nashville's definitely going to have to contend with. I'm not sure if we're going to see another 5-1 or 4-1 win for the Preds this time. This may be a drag it out, grind it out game for the Nashville Predators. So yeah, maybe the Predators do need to go a little bit more old school to get this win, maybe as they would, as opposed to what they would in other teams that they played during this stretch. The big question mark for Nashville tonight, it's going to be on defense. So we talked about this a little bit off the top. Spencer Stastney is out week to week. He picked up an upper body injury during his first game back after his call-up. the other night against Winnipeg, which that's unfortunate in on its own because the Nashville Predators really like Spencer Stastney. We've said it. Like, the Predators have really been wanting to fast track him. That's how much they believe in him. So for him to be out does throw a wrench in their plans, maybe just a little bit. And in comes, we think, according to like the depth chart and the reports right now, Tyson Barrie. All right. Look here. Maybe it is time to give Tyson Barrie another shot. Like he hasn't played since the 9-2 like the 9-2 loss. And he wasn't particularly great in that game. In fact, he was probably actively bad. It's been a little bit of an issue because he seems like he's been actively bad in a couple of his last few appearances. Not just like not good or average, but actually actively bad. Yeah, I mean, whatever happens tonight, and I will say Spencer Stastney was playing with Luke Schenn. So is Tyson Barrie and Luke Schenn going to be a 1-2 duo for the Nashville Predators? Is that going to be a line? And if it is, dear God, please have mercy on us all. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to watch. And I'm actually kind of excited to see what Tyson Barrie can do with this chance. Maybe now that his focus isn't necessarily on him and his agent trying to find a trade, maybe he's not just, watching the clock or jumping out there because he's stressed because he needs to up his trade value. Maybe now that he knows where he's going to be for the end of the year and just kind of wants to ride it out. And, maybe just focus a little bit more on playing good hockey. Maybe that helps a little bit. Or maybe it just goes the other way where he's just so in his head that it doesn't necessarily bode out well for him or for the Nashville Predators. I will say I would expect maybe some lines to be tweaked. I don't think they're going to put Tyson Barrie with Luke Schenn. I would say maybe you shuffle a little bit. Maybe, Alexander Carrier or Ryan McDonough go with, either Schenn or Barrie. Maybe Alexander Carrier moves around. Jeremy Lauzon might move around. I would say you're probably going to see some shuffling on defense, but it's going to be interesting to watch if you're counting on Tyson Barrie and Luke Schenn to lock down a key defensive stand late in the game. We'll certainly have a lot to talk about on Monday. That's certainly for sure. Yeah, we will see you on Monday for recap of this game. We'll talk about how the defense worked together after all of these injuries, and we will have some plus minus for you as well. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Every day this week. If you want more Preds, you can read my work at penaltyboxradio.com or follow me on Twitter at _NSMorgan. That's going to do it for us on today's Locked On Predators podcast. We'll see you next week.